Welcome to the Global Discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins and I'm delighted to be joined by Sophie Milliken MBE. It's great to have you here, Sophie. You're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our worldwide audience. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's great to be here. And I guess it depends on which situation I'm in as to which hat I'm wearing, because I do wear a lot of hats. And my main role at the moment is running Moja. So this is my newish business, although we've just turned a year old. So we've had our first birthday. We work with entrepreneurs and senior business leaders to grow their profiles and get them known within their industry and beyond. So we're not PR, we're not marketing, we're maybe something between the two, bit different, but having lots of fun with that new business. I often say to people, it's kind of nice being back in startup mode again, but with the experience, a team and a bit of cash behind us, which certainly wasn't the case for my first business. Alongside that, I've got a few other interests. So I'm chair of the charity SmartWorks in Newcastle. So for those people that haven't heard of SmartWorks before, particularly the international audience, SmartWorks is a female unemployment charity. So we work with unemployed women across the region. So my region's the northeast of England. And we support these women with interview clothing and coaching to increase their confidence that when they're going for job interviews, hopefully they're more likely to secure the job. So I've been doing that for 2 years and absolutely love it. I've got a really dynamic board of trustees. So I get lots of energy and enthusiasm from them. And we're doing, great things with the clients that we support. So really enjoy that. I've also written a couple of books and I've got a couple of non-executive roles as well that keep me busy. So always lots going on, Simon.
Well, that's great. And I know if you go back even further, you did a lot of work with the John Lewis partnership, didn't you? Many moons ago. How did you get from the John Lewis partnership to deciding to set up your first business and now, of course, your current business?
Yeah, so I took that traditional corporate path, I guess, after university. So initially, I actually wanted to be a fashion buyer when I went off to uni. That was the thing. I thought, oh, it'll be super glamorous. I'll get to travel the world and buy nice things. So naive. So I'm off at uni with that goal, and I find out a couple of months into my course that if I want to do that role, I'd probably have to move down to London. And I'm from Newcastle. I was in Leeds at uni, and London felt really scary to 19-year-old Sophie off at uni. So it freaked me out, to be honest. And I then thought, what could I do that feels a bit similar but is a bit less intimidating? So I applied for the John Lewis graduate scheme, but applied specifically for the Newcastle branch. I was lucky in that I got a place on the program, and it was a really good grounding in business, very corporate, although John Lewis is a bit cult-like in how it's set up with the partnership, and it's very democratic. But I learned a lot in terms of business. I got to spend a lot of time with really inspiring people. And they supported me, and they sponsored me through my master's degree, which was incredible. They encouraged me, ironically, to move down to London about 5 years, I think, into my time at Newcastle, maybe a bit less actually. So I went down to London on a 6-month secondment and never came back really, or never came back to John Lewis. And I think I was down in London for maybe 6-7 years. And absolutely loved it. And the last role that I ended up in there was actually head of graduate recruitment. And it was a funny role because when I joined that team, I had a really small team, and we had one graduate scheme, which was a retail management scheme, and one summer placement scheme, which was also a retail scheme. But by the time I left, we had about 15 different programs across different functions. And one of those was a buying scheme. And when I was setting that up, I had the opportunity to go on a buying trip with the towel buyer. So very interesting. And he gave me the choice to either go to Manchester or Portugal. So guess which one I chose? It was obviously Portugal, but it was so interesting to learn how that role actually really worked in reality. So we got up super early, flew over to from Gatwick over to Portugal on a 4 a.m. EasyJet flight. It was not glamorous. Picked up straight from the airport to the towel factory and we must have spent 15, 16 hours in this towel factory, looking at towels, talking about towels, touching the towels, all towel talk. On no food, just espressos all day. So it was pretty intense. It was interesting because actually it was, apparently this major towel factory in the world, and we got to see towels that were made by other really well-known retailers throughout the world, American brands and things. But it was intense. And then we got back to the hotel, changed in 20 minutes, off out for dinner with the towel factory owner to talk about towels some more. So it was a great intro into buying, and definitely put to rest any thoughts that it was glamorous. So yeah, so got to do that. So I left John Lewis in 2013. By that point, I'd got married, had my daughter, moved back to Newcastle, and was commuting between Newcastle and London. So door to door, probably about 4.5 hour trip. I did it once a week rather than every day, because that would be crazy. And then I think my daughter was about 1, and there was an opportunity for me to take voluntary redundancy. So the partnership was going through what's become about 10 or 12 restructures since I left. It's changed a lot, as has the whole of retail. And my team was being moved out to Bracknell, and that trip would have just been too much for me. It was just not cool. So I took the opportunity to leave, looked at jobs in Newcastle, tried to find something similar, but of course graduate recruitment in Newcastle, pretty niche. Couldn't find anything that was even vaguely equivalent. Came with a huge pay cut, and I was on a good salary at that point. And I've always been ambitious, so didn't want to take that much of a drop. I thought it would be quite demotivating. So instead, I decided to set up what was my first business, which was a graduate recruitment and employability consultancy, which I set up with a friend, I suppose, a guy called Simon. He had a similar role to me, but at HSBC, and we used to both commute into London. So him from sort of Leeds area and me from Newcastle. So we had that in common. But I look back and I think it was a bit bonkers, because we were both very corporate people setting up this business with no real business experience in the sort of running your own business sense, just corporate experience, but a plan and an idea. And, it grew, and it did really well. I mean, Simon left a couple of years in, and at the point that he left, it was quite an interesting time, because I'd just got divorced, I think, at that point. So my daughter was, well, she must have been about 3 by then, maybe by the time Simon left, maybe a bit older, 4 or something. And at the point that Simon left, we only had, well, in fact, we didn't have any orders in for that year, because he left at the end of the financial year, and the way that the business worked, we didn't necessarily have things booked in. So I was sat there, we were working at home at this point. So it was just me, had a team of associates that I could pull in, no office, sat at home, no orders. And I was a single parent. So it was kind of panic mode. It was that point where you say, is this the right thing? Should I carry on? Should I go and get a job? What do I do? But I always believed in that business. So I carried on. I went out, got on the road. I went to see all of our existing clients, people that had done business with us before. I spoke to them. I went to follow up on any prospects that Simon had been having conversations with, because he used to do all the business development side. And I think I'd signed up maybe 200 grand's worth of business in about 6 weeks after he left, which was good for us at that point. It was really good. And then just from then on, it just grew. And I think it was helped a lot by my enthusiasm for what we did. So I really believed in what we did. So we worked with employers to design their assessment processes and materials. And then we worked with universities to prepare their students to secure graduate jobs. So we used to hire out football stadiums around the country and put maybe 300, 400, 500 students a day through these mock assessment centres. So it was a really interesting and unique business model. And we had so much fun going to all these various stadiums around the country and seeing the impact that we could make on students' job prospects. So it was brilliant. And really enjoyed that, built that business over those years, and then got approached in 2018 to sell it. Wasn't planning on selling it, hadn't even crossed my mind. I look back, I was unbelievably naive because I didn't understand that world. I'd never had investment in the business. We didn't need it. By this point, it was doing really well. But I always had that nagging doubt around, well, what if next year they don't sign? And it was never a problem. The sales were like this. It was never, we never lost jobs. So I decided to sell it. The deal took 18 months, maybe 2 years even, to go through. So it was quite a long journey. And I think I signed the paperwork in September 2019. That was a really busy time of year for us. And if you then think about back to that sort of time, we then hit the pandemic in the February afterwards. So we had an office in Newcastle at this point. The company that acquired me were based in Manchester with an office in London. So I didn't see that much of them because of the pandemic. So it was a really weird time. And I was in survival mode because I was still running the business. So I sold it, but I was still, to clients, to the team, it should have still felt the same. So I was in panic mode thinking, we've been running these big events for hundreds of students. We can't do those anymore. That was a big part of the income. So we had to pivot really quickly and create the technology that we needed to be able to do it online. So luckily we did that. I persuaded one of our clients to pilot it as an online option. We then filmed it through Zoom. I mean, it was so basic when I look back, but we were just trying to be really creative as to how we could show the bigger clients how it could work for them if it moved online. So it worked. We won even more business. So we had a record year in the year of the pandemic, which in theory should have gone bust, but it was a record year. So it did really well. But then as we were sort of starting to come out of the pandemic, I started feeling unsettled. There was a lot of investment into that overall business. And I was seeing things to do with investors and some of my colleagues that I didn't like. So I've got to a point where I felt like my values weren't aligned with theirs. I've always believed in putting the clients first and the team. So people have always been really, really important to me. And I think without offering a good, honest and fair and quality service, and without supporting your people and doing the right thing by them, it's not a kind of business that I want to do. So it felt like there was a mismatch there, which I totally, not realized until we were coming out of the pandemic. So it must have been end of 2021, November 2021, I realized, right, time to go. But then knew I would have a million restrictions as to what I could and couldn't do when I left. So started thinking about, well, what do I do if I leave this industry? It's what I've known for quite a long time. And then I thought about all the things that had made that business successful. And a lot of it was to do with me and my relationships with clients, with the team. And a lot of those had grown and developed from me spending time on my profile. So it was never intentional. But when I started doing things like, I wrote 2 books, I did a TEDx talk, and each time I did something that was cast as a profile raising activity, it led on to something else. So something would happen and someone would invite me to something, and just it had this snowball effect. And what it meant was that when I was going to do sales meetings, it was super easy to sell stuff because people felt like they knew me. They'd seen me on various platforms and things. So it made it a very genuine conversation and very easy to sell. And then it was also that fun stuff as well. So getting those fun invitations. And I thought there's a business idea in this. And here we are now with Moja.
Well, what a journey. Thanks so much for sharing that, Sophie. I love so many elements in that. And I also find it very interesting that the pivot as you went into the pandemic, you had to move, from booking out huge stadiums all around the country to suddenly going, okay, what do we do? I mean, oh my goodness. And you're in the stage of selling the business too. So you got to kind of keep the wheels going. And yet you had your best year ever. What an interesting turn up. You couldn't predict that. I mean, that's just incredible. And of course, as when businesses do get sold, the founders and the people that are driving it initially, over time, a lot of them do move on and move out. And we see that quite a bit. And so I want to just touch on the new business now, because one of the things that I know you talk about is about somebody's personal profile or professional profile. And you kind of touched on it there in terms of leveling up and certain activities that you do to help build your profile. And over quite a number of years now, the advent of somebody's personal brand, personal profile, professional outlook has really become much more of a thing, particularly in business, particularly in corporate environments or business to business environments. And of course, we see an awful lot of celebrities, we see an awful lot of influencers, we see an awful lot of people building their online persona in both B2B and B2C environments. So the type of work that you're doing there to help people raise their profiles, how important is that in today's world? And what are some of the good advice that you give to people?
I think it is really important because founders are more interesting than businesses. So even if the business is a great business, which I'm sure everyone believes their business is, and I'm sure they are all great, it's the stories around the people that bring things to life, and that's what we focus on. So when we work with people, we get them to do this online quiz that we've got. Literally takes them 2 minutes, and it gives them a score in each element of their profile, and it gives them some hints and tips as to what they could do if they just wanted to go and do it on their own, or it gives us some steer around how we would build a plan for them. And the best way to describe it is, I would say that if someone Googles your name, the stuff that comes up is the activities that we would work on. So when people talk about personal brand, and I kind of steer away from that term, even though it is what we do, because I think it's got quite negative connotations now. So it's a bit of a funny term. But when people think about that, they often think just about social media. So, someone's LinkedIn famous, or, Instagram, or whichever platform it is that's big in their industry. And while it's great to have a presence on social media, and a lot of people get leads from social media, and I've won work, like big contracts through social media over the years, that's not everything. And one great post today might sort of carry you for a few weeks, or as long as the post lasts, but that's not what's going to come up on Google when someone Googles you. So we want to do the substance and the quality that clients can then talk about and share on social media, but we don't want to be writing LinkedIn posts for people, which is what some people assume personal branding is. Does that make sense?
That I really like that, and the substance and the quality and the separation between that and the latest post or you're following on a particular platform. That's such an important, insightful area, Sophie.
I think so. And I think, to bring it to life a bit further, some of those things might be things like awards. So, really quality, good awards, which we know are judged properly, not sort of pay to play type awards. So really useful ones where if you win, they're going to have some gravitas behind them. Ones where there's great community elements, because we know a lot about different awards. So that would be one thing. It might be that we help someone to get more speaking engagements so that they're getting that visibility, which again, super useful usually for them to get leads into their business. They might want to write a book. We've got a couple of clients writing books at the moment, so we're supporting them with that. It might be that they want to secure a non-executive board role in a different business, because they think, that's going to add to their profiles as well. So all sorts of different things. Another thing's podcasts. So if I was in our office today, we've got a podcast studio at the office, so we help people to come up with ideas for their podcast, and we do all the production, etc. for them. So all sorts of different things. And, like I say, the things that will live on Google a lot longer than your latest LinkedIn post.
Yeah, I love that. And going back to what you said at the start when we were talking about this topic, you were talking about the individuals in business being sort of more well known or helpful to the business. And I immediately thought of Microsoft and Satya Nadella, or Apple and Tim Cook, and Amazon and Jeff Bezos, and Tesla and Elon Musk. And the list goes, Virgin, Richard Branson, you kind of get that professional profile. And I suppose Elon Musk would be an exception, because it's not just the latest social media post, but it's substance, it's things that they've done maybe outside of that. And I really like that, because you don't hear many people talking about that. And I think you're spot on, Sophie, when you say that when people think about the professional profile, they use that term, and I used it too, personal branding. Mm-hmm. And they immediately, well, not everybody, but I think a lot of people just jump to social media. the more I put out there, the better my profile is going to be. And that's not necessarily the case. So thanks for giving us that insight into the new business. That's a really important area. Now, I've got to ask you about a couple of other things. You've mentioned angel investing. You've mentioned you've wrote a few books. You've got the City Ladies Networking that I think you set up a few years ago. So we've got the books, the networking, the MBE, and we've got to talk a little bit about angel investing too. So you can start wherever you like, but I'd love you to share with our worldwide audience, because they're 4 huge topics outside of the business that you're running. So could you just touch on a few of those for us?
Yeah, so the angel investing is something that I developed an interest for after I sold the business. So when I sold the business, I did get some cash initially, and then the rest of the package I got was in share options, which I then walked away from when I left, because I didn't want to be tied to the business in any way. So still a bit raw, still a bit painful, that side of things, but I did have some cash initially. I spent some of it on some property. So got I changed my house and I got a couple of flats, and I plan to do a bit more on the property side, but I think the markets are just really weird at the moment. Plus I've put a lot of my money into Moja now anyway. And then yes, made a couple of angel investments, which one of them is hopefully going to have an event at some point later this year. And once that happens, and or once I start making decent money from Moja, I'd like to do a lot more of that, because I find it really interesting. I think there's different levels of investing. So the investments that I've made so far, I haven't got involved at all in the running of those businesses. So just been very much an angel silent investor. But it's been interesting to cut my teeth on that and to see how it works and to understand that side of things a bit better. When I'm in a position to do so, I'd like to do a lot more investing. And I think that I would like to almost come up with my own strategy around who I invest in, because I get sent pitch decks literally every week now. And you can't invest in everything, obviously. And I think I need to have some criteria, and it might be around, the Northeast as an example, because we've got some amazing entrepreneurs in the region, and I'm really passionate about Newcastle and the whole of the Northeast. And it would be nice to feel like I was able to support people within the region. So that might be the criteria. I've also joined the board of an investment fund, which is due to IPO on the stock exchange, hopefully at some point this year. It's taken us a bit longer than we hoped to get off the ground because of the markets, again, making things challenging. And this investment fund is going to be providing investment to female-led businesses and or minority-led businesses, because if you look at the landscape for investment funding, it is massively imbalanced, and less than a penny in every pound goes to female founders, which I could not believe when I discovered that. And I only found that stat out when I was doing some research for my PhD, which I started last year. And I just could not believe how little money was going to female founders. So that's a project that I'm really excited to get off the ground, hopefully at some point this year. So that would be on the investing side. What else did you have on your list? City Ladies. So that is my networking group. So when I first moved back to the Northeast, I was going to all sorts of different networking events, found a lot of them quite boring, a bit stale. Not really my kind of scene. And then I went to a couple of different women's networking groups. And then there was one in particular that I really liked, where I made what have now become friends, but were certainly sort of business contacts initially. And then that group was closing down. So 3 of us that used to go to it said, well, we'll take it on and we'll do it. So a bit of a side hustle thing. And we took it over in Newcastle and Middlesbrough and London at the time as well. So we had 3 different groups going, very informal, literally just a breakfast once a month with some networking, a speaker, a bit more networking, and that was it. It was pretty straightforward. Obviously, the pandemic ruined that as well. So we went online for a bit, and then we haven't resurrected Middlesbrough again, but the Newcastle one sells out every month. I mean, we're already sold out up to May or June, I think, already for this year for Newcastle. So it's really good. And then we just started up the London ones again in January. So we've just done the first London one, and we're trying to grow that group as well. So that's been super fun. What else did you have? Books?
Well, look, I mean, how you're doing all this stuff is incredible.
I like to be
But
busy.
the other two things that I'd love to talk about is obviously the books and, of course, the MBE.
So the books. So the first book, I think I've got one here actually. Oh, we're all falling over. There's this one, although this is the original cover. It's I've done a revised edition last year. It's got a green cover. So this one's From Learner to Earner. So I wrote that when I was in the first business, so the graduate recruitment consultancy business, and it's a guide for students to help them secure graduate jobs. And it is so good. Like, I'm still really proud of this book, because not only does it talk them through the process of getting a job, which, if you remember, way back when, we might have been applying for jobs, sort of, our first jobs, you don't really know where to start. And the process that students go through is quite different to the process our parents or we might have gone through, because it's more competitive. So really useful guide. Comes with 18 downloadable resources, so things like CV templates, career action plans. So it's very practical as well. So I wrote that in 2018, I think, and then I revised it last year because I wanted to include loads of stuff about virtual recruitment, because that's now the big thing. So it's totally up to date now. It's really, really good. So I wrote that, like I say, 2018, and I wrote it in 3 weeks. And I wrote it in 3 weeks because when I was talking to the publisher about wanting it to come out around that time of year when I know students go for graduate jobs, she then started working back with me to say, right, well, we need the manuscript in 3 weeks' time. Luckily, it was a time of year where I could clear the diary and commit to it, and I'd planned it all out, and I had a lot of content already that I'd created for blogs or articles or whatever. So it wasn't too bad. It was okay. So that was brilliant. And then off the back of that, when I did my book launch for that, I got offered 2 TEDx talks. So I didn't realize then that we have to apply for them. I just got offered them. So just said yes to the first one. Thought I'll figure out how to make that work nearer the time. But that was brilliant. And then the second book is called The Ambition Accelerator. I haven't got any of those knocking around, I don't think. But that was my lockdown project. So if you remember me saying I was panicking about how we'd make that business work and pivot to online, I was literally waking up at 4 a.m. every day for months, panicking and not wanting to let the team see that. I was really worried about how the business would go. So I thought, well, I've got this idea about writing another book. I'm just going to use that time that I'm waking up and just it's quiet time and get my head down and write it. So that one is aimed specifically at young women to encourage them to be ambitious with their careers, whether that be a corporate route or setting up their own business or something in between. And I took the opportunity, because we were in lockdown, to interview some women that I admire, to include their stories. I then, halfway through the interviews, came up with the idea to turn the interview content into a podcast. So there's a podcast knocking around from that book as well. So it took me a lot longer to write that one, though, because I had other things going on. So I think it was about 5 or 6 months. But yeah, 2 books. So pretty cool.
That's really good. Really
so
good.
It's always quite funny when people introduce me as an author at things, and I go, an author? Oh, yeah.
Well, the other thing that I want to jump in on is because you've also said something there which I think is really important for people to hear, because a lot of business people did really well during the panic, but a lot of business people also struggled, and there was a lot of sleepless nights. A lot of businesses went bankrupt. A lot of businesses had to shut. Retail in particular, one of the topics we were talking about earlier, got really impacted. Travel got really impacted, of course, and lots of businesses struggled. And I think it's so refreshing to hear somebody talk about, I was just waking up. I was panicking. And it's so good that we share those kind of stories. Now, of course, Sophie, being Sophie, decides to write a book during that period of time too, which, I mean, it's incredible. But I really do appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think it's really good, because often people just see the finished, polished result, and they don't see the work that goes into it, or the trials and the tribulations. So thanks for sharing that, Sophie.
You're absolutely right with that. And actually the TEDx talk that I did, which was literally, I think I recorded that 2 weeks before the first lockdown, maybe. And that title, and you can find it if you just pop my name into YouTube, it comes up. And it was called The Truth Behind the Show Reel. And it was a talk about how at that point, that business was doing really, really well. I was winning all these awards. Literally, everything was just it seemed perfect. If you were looking in, you'd be thinking, oh my God, everything she touches turns to gold. That was how it looked on the outside. And I didn't want... I actually wanted to talk about something to do with employability for my TEDx talk, but the lady that was organizing it was asking me about my journey, and she was asking me where my grit came from, where my determination came from, and I started telling her all these things, and she said, I really would love you to do that as your TEDx talk. So the TEDx talk is called The Truth Behind the Show Reel, which talks about the fact that, yes, it might look like I've got everything going on and things are really successful, and to a point they were at that point in time. However, that doesn't just happen overnight. There was quite a lot of work that went on behind the scenes, and a lot of those ups and downs, so it was bringing that to life a bit more.
That's great. And look, we've got to touch on the MBE.
A very exciting end to last year. It was funny actually, when I found out, it was a dark, cold, miserable November afternoon, and I was actually at my old school, which isn't that far from where I live, and I'd been doing a talk to the sixth form students, because I'm an enterprise advisor back at my old school, so I go and do talks for them in various bits and pieces. And I really couldn't be bothered that day. I was so tired, and I'm not great in the afternoons. I'm definitely a bit more bubbly and upbeat in the mornings. I'm a morning person. And I was like, oh, I've got to go there. I had a really bad headache, and I got there, and you put on the front, right? Don't you? You're doing the talk, and you want to encourage and motivate these kids. And I did it, and there were some great questions. So then that got me going, and it was a really good session. But when I'm there, I don't have any signal on my phone. It's just, I don't know whether they do it on purpose so the kids can't play on phones or something, but there's no signal. And I came out of the school, and it was dark, and it was so grim. And I pressed refresh on my phone, and all these emails dropped in, and this email popped up from this really weird inbox address. It was something like NY on honors 23 or something like that, and I went, oh, what's that? And I opened it, and it was this really formal email with this letter attached, apologizing that it was late sending me it, and then telling me that I'd got this MBE. And I was thinking, well, first of all, I was like, whoa, this is mental. I'm walking outside of my old school, walking down that path that I used to walk down to go and get the bus home, about 30 years ago, whatever it was. And I get this email at this point in time. But also I was thinking, why are they apologizing to me? Like, I would never know that this email's late. So it was really weird. And then I realized it was because I had to accept it within a day. So they didn't give me long to come back to them and say, yes, please, yes, I do want it. So that made me chuckle. But I couldn't even read it properly. It's a really long letter telling you about how you can't tell anyone until 10:30 p.m. on the 30th of December. So it was really formal, strictly in confidence. You have to reply to accept it and send these bits and pieces back. And I was like, well, what's it for? And I thought, I initially thought, I wonder if it's to do with the charity that I've been volunteering at, because quite often get them for charity things. It's meant to be sort of above and beyond the day job, if you like. And then I saw it was for business and for education. And I've since had a letter from the Department for Business and Trade, which had a bit more detail in, and it was talking about the work that I'd done with students when I was in the last business, and it had a stat in, the business had helped over 30,000 students to prepare them for work, so it was obviously linked to that as well, and that was why it was for education as well as business. But it was just so exciting, but it was so hard to keep the secret. It was so hard. So I didn't see people for ages because I thought, I'm just going to blab. I'm very good at secrets. And then I decided I'm going to have a party on the 30th. So we have a house party. My daughter knew, so she's just turned 11. She would have still been 10 at that point. And we had this plan that she was going to tell everybody at 10:30. But my friends are a bit boring like me, and we like to go to bed early. So it got to about 10 o'clock. And a few of them were like, oh yeah, I'm just going to head off now. And I'm like, yeah, you can't. can't leave. And they're like, what? And I said, you can go at 10:30 or 10:35, but you just have to hang on until 10:30. And I think they sort of say to me, is there something going on here? You got some kind of announcement? And then it was just really awkward for these sort of 20 minutes or whatever, trying to keep people. And then it got to 10:30 and my daughter did this announcement, and it was so lovely actually to be able to have her involved and for her to share that news. But it's been super cool, great end to that year, start to this year. I've been invited to some amazing things. I just got an invitation from the Sheriff of London to go to an event with some senior business leaders at the Old Bailey for International Women's Day. So we're going to have this discussion, and then we're going to meet some of the judges over lunch and go and observe court. So like really cool, fun things. And I'm hoping at some point that I can use it to get involved in more things regionally and promote the region and things like that, because I'm a big fan of paying it forward and using things like that as a platform to do good.
Well, congratulations, Sophie, on the
Thanks.
MBE. It's an outstanding achievement. And I know that MBE recipients, they're normally invited to attend an investiture ceremony, aren't they?
Right.
At either Buckingham Palace or one of the royal households. You receive your MBE from the Queen or the King now, or another member of the royal family. So, I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, every day when I pick my daughter up from school, she says, Mum, have you heard yet? Have you heard when it's going to be? No, not yet. But apparently you get 3 months notice. So you get a letter, or I don't know whether it be an email again or whatever, but I think you get a letter with the date, and they give you 3 months notice. And like you say, it's either at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. And it can be the King, Prince William or Princess Anne, but you don't find out who it is until the day that you're there. So very exciting.
Exciting
Yeah,
times,
my
Sophie.
daughter is beside herself with excitement because she gets to come.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, look, before we run out of time, we've covered some wonderful areas so far. How you're doing it all, I don't know. But I want to ask you a couple of quick questions before we run out of time today. You mentioned a couple of books that you've written yourself, which are very, very popular. But when it comes to your own learning style, how do you like to take on information? Do you read other people's books? Do you read biographies? Do you like fiction? Are you an audiobook person, a podcast person? Have you just had enough learning at the end of the day? You just want to put on Netflix and do nothing else? How does that work for you, Sophie?
I love learning. So every year I set myself some kind of learning challenge. This year, well, or last year even, I started my PhD. So that's wiping me out for the foreseeable future on that front. But I love reading. I've always got a business book on the go, and then a non-business book on the go that's not really about learning, that's more about switching off actually. And I've even got now a business book club where we meet every month and we're talking about a book together, which is quite fun and keeps us all on track. So for me, I prefer, for a business book, for learning, I prefer a proper paperback that I can scribble on. For fun reading, it's my Kindle, and I read every day. It's my wind down routine. It's the only thing that really switches my brain off, I think, in the evening. So I would rather read than watch Netflix. So, Netflix might suck me in if there's something really amazing, and I might binge watch something over a weekend. But not that often, because I get distracted. I'm either thinking about something, or I'm looking at my phone, or read a magazine, or whatever it might be. Whereas when you read a book that's about something completely different, that's the point where you can switch off. So that works really well for me. But I do like podcasts as well. I quite like business podcasts. I kind of dip into things. So, probably a bit of a boring choice these days, but I do like the Diary of a CEO podcast when there's business guests on it. Not so keen on some of the other ones, but I like the business ones. But for me, what I would tend to do every so often is I'll just go on to podcasts, and I prefer listening to them and walking ideally if I can at the same time. And I'll put someone's name in, so someone I'm interested in, and see what comes up, because then you're getting a bit more of a variety. So it's more the person talking rather than the topic or a particular show. But
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know whether I did an episode, and I think it was Vanessa Fox O'Loughlin, who is a #1 crime writer in Ireland. She's released a number of really best-selling books. I mean, she's outstanding in her field. And interestingly, the Royal Connection, I suppose, she launched a new book in January, and it was only knocked off the #1 spot by the book Spare, which was funny. But talking to Vanessa, I'm pretty sure it was Vanessa who said it to me, is that when you're listening to audiobooks, for example, which I'm a big fan of, okay, I love audiobooks, but you can be doing something else. So there is a little element of distraction there. And she was saying that when you pick up a book, a physical book, whether it's that paperback or whatever, you've got the undivided attention of somebody. And it's like you're saying, it's your sort of switch off mechanism that you can just immerse yourself in that book, whether it's something for pleasure, something for business, but it's just, you've got that undivided attention. So thanks for sharing that. Now, of course, people are inspired by you and everything that you've done and everything that you've achieved, and that the journey continues with the new business and everything else that's going on. But when I ask you about people that you admire, people that have inspired you along the way, what springs to mind, Sophie?
I think different people have inspired me at different points of my career, I guess. So when I was starting out, I wouldn't say there were a lot of obvious role models for me. So in terms of business, it was people like Richard Branson and Alan Sugar. But then as I, developed in my business, I wanted to find people that felt a bit more like me. So I'd look more towards women. But there weren't as many visible role models as I think there are now, which is great. So I think that's a real positive in terms of more women being business owners. I've read books of people like Karen Brady. I really liked Michelle Mone at one point, but she's become really controversial now. So she's kind of off the list. But at that point, she'd created this amazing brand and done really cool things. So, for that point of where I was at in my journey, I did find her story really interesting. Some of the women that I interviewed for my book, The Ambition Accelerator, are fairly well known in business. You've got Sara Davies, who's on Dragon's Den. Sara is an ambassador for the charity that I run as well. So I know Sara reasonably well, and she's very well known across the Northeast. She's got a business, Crafter's Companion, that's doing amazingly well. She's always on TV and has so much energy. So I really enjoy learning from her, spending time with her. She's just always, if you think I've got a lot going on, she's just another league, and she's always upbeat. I've never seen her without that energy. She's always very present in the moment. So she's brilliant. I also really like Linda Plant, who is on The Apprentice. She was also in my book. Spent a bit of time with Linda, and she is one of the interviewers in the final 5 stage of The Apprentice. And she is just so wise. She's had an incredible journey, and I love watching her speak. She talks so passionately, and she's still got so much drive and enthusiasm for business, even though she's quite late on in her career now. So she's brilliant. And then just people that are around me, people that I spend time with. Someone that I know locally describes people as either being radiators or drains. And I really like that analogy. So I like to spend my time with radiators that are heating me up and give me lots of warmth and energy in my life, rather than the people that suck the life out of me, those drains. So, I'm lucky that I've got a great circle of friends, and a lot of my friends are business friends. So they get what I'm interested in because they've got similar interests. And I think that helps as well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And radiators and drains, I've never heard that term before,
It's
but
cool. It's good,
that's stuck in there now. Yeah, it's spot on. So leading on from people that you admire at various stages of your career and your life, what about the best advice that you received? Advice that you've taken to heart that you think is really, really valuable?
So I think, following on from what I was saying about the radiators and spending time with those good people, I think there's something in surrounding yourself with great people, because they will they'll lift you up and cheer you up when you're having those tough times, but they'll also be there to celebrate you with the wins as well. And I think that's really important. And I think alongside that, once you've got that strong network of people that you trust, there's always someone that you can go to when you are having those particularly challenging times. So, you know, when I look back to when I sold my first business, I made so many mistakes that I would never make now. And if I ever get to a point where I sell a business again, I know exactly who I would go to for advice. And I also think there's something linked to that around trusting your gut instinct. If something doesn't feel right or you're noticing red flags, you need to explore those and be, you know, stick to, you know, those feelings that you have, because you can't underestimate how strong that gut instinct is for knowing what's right and wrong.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's a great answer, Sophie. And as we look forward, as you plan the next 3, 6, 12 months, you're very busy. You've got lots going on. It must take a lot of planning and organizing. What are you passionate about? What does the roadmap look like? What are you hoping to achieve as you move forward this year?
World domination, lots of things. Like I say, I've always got loads of interest. I really want to grow Moja. I want to take on more clients. I've got some, you know, some goals around what that would look like by the end of this year. So I think I worked out we want to have 80 retained clients by December. So that's what we're working towards. That's the goal. So that's a very clear roadmap for that one. With SmartWorks, we want to increase the number of women that we support again. So last year we doubled the number of women that we supported, which was a pretty big jump. This year we want to build upon that again. I want to pass the first year of my PhD, because it's all taught lessons for year 1 and year 2 for me. So I need to pass it so that they let me loose and let me go and do some research. And that's, yeah, I'd say that's probably it for the moment. It's funny actually, because I'm sat in my office at home today and I have this, I don't know whether I can twist it around, but I have this vision board thing. Can you see it on that top shelf? So I do that every new year. I'll review it and I'll pull the things off that I've done, and I'll write on the back maybe a note about what I've done, or, you know, something that's happened, and put it in a box, and then I'll stick new things on. So one of the new things that went on this year is a picture of Necker Island. So I want to go and meet Richard Branson on Necker Island. So that's on my goal list for this year. And it's funny, I don't work from home that often, maybe the odd Friday like today. But when I sit here, I do glance at that, and it does focus me on, right, okay, well, that's not just going to happen probably. So it makes me a bit more focused. And I've actually got a call with someone from Richard Branson's team next week on Zoom. And it's been booked in for quite a while now to explore going over there. So hopefully this time next year I'll have been.
Well, look, being inspired by a trip to and spending some time on Necker Island is wonderful. So that's great. We were talking about Richard Branson earlier, so that's a nice link. Well, look, you'll have to send me the wonderful photographs when you get to Necker Island, because if anybody's going to end up on Necker Island for
on LinkedIn,
it's definitely you, Sophie. The last thing I want to ask you, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to shine a light on? But also, if people want to find out more about Moja, or more about all the work that you're doing, or find out about the books, etc., where is the best place to send people to?
I think probably over to LinkedIn. So I'm pretty active on all the main sort of social media platforms, but LinkedIn is my favorite. It's where I hang out the most. And then there's links to everything that I do on there. So you'd find the links for the books, the links to Moja. We've been really busy doing a lot of resources for Moja actually over the last few months. So we recently launched our YouTube channel. So it's Moja_social on YouTube, and we've just recently released this free 7-part masterclass of different videos that link to all the things that we were talking about earlier around raising your profile. And if anyone wants to reach out to me through LinkedIn, we can put them on the mailing list for that, because each week we're releasing a new one, or pointing them in the direction of a new one. But we're doing various resources that come with those, and it's all free. So this week we're doing how do you get featured more in the press and the media, and it comes with a free press release template. So it's really good. We're getting some amazing feedback on that. So definitely worth having a look, but come and find me on LinkedIn.
Well, that's wonderful. And that seems like a great place to bring this interview and this discussion that we've had today here on the Global Discussion to an end. It's been a real pleasure to catch up with Sophie Milliken MBE. Thanks, Sophie, for joining me. Thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, do all the things I need you to do to help support the podcast. And I hope you join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Sophie, it's been a real pleasure. Continued success this year.
Thank you.